You want to know why? Stay tuned.
We're knocking them down. We're putting them up and knocking them down.
Episode 282, bang.
Bang.
Welcome to the Rebel Edge, everybody. We are operating on the 14th of November. Pete Najarian, that guy. Mm-hmm. Jared, the rest of this. Yeah, that's right, is operating the sound effects as well as the videos and so forth that you see. So we always appreciate your work, Jared. Thank you.
Thanks.
Let's get started with today's macro minute, shall we, Pete?
Let's do it.
Interest-sensitive stocks reacting strongly to the CPI report. But I'll caution, Pete, that the CPI report, although flat month over month, was up 3.2% year over year. And I don't know if I'd be putting out the bunting about that. But apparently people are, and, you know, like they say, it's real if you're short.
It sure is. And if you're long, it's real too, but in a much better way. And here's the thing, John. I totally agree with you on the macro side of things. I think you look at the CPI number and the fact that it cooled off to some degree. All you've got to do is look at those algorithms, man. Those algorithms immediately see that. And what do? They start buying the NASDAQ. And take a look at the NASDAQ up nearly 2.25% today. So there is, that's one thing, John. There's one thing about being humans and buying. There's another thing about algorithms that are just set. And when they see those numbers, they see what's going on with the 10-year, they start buying.
Yep, and they've done it ever since 8:30 and about 4 seconds, Pete.
Ain't that the truth?
As soon as that came out, and you know what happened, folks? We're going to have to talk about the fantastic futures.
Fantastic futures.
And the reason that we got to talk about fantastic futures is that the 10-year dropped a whopping 17 basis points, Pete, from the time that number came out, the CPI number. And we traded down to about 4.45%, lowest level in months.
Well, and I'll tell you this, and I'll be really quick. We talk about crude oil all the time, right? The fact that we were in the 90s and then we dropped all the way back. We were on Thursday, we were at 75, folks. And now here today, we got up there almost back up near 80, about 79.50. We're giving that back to some degree now. But the one thing I would talk about a little bit, John, there are 11 states right now where gasoline is under $3. So take a look at that. Take a look at where the biggest one is. You wouldn't be surprised to know that it's Texas at $2.80 a gallon. And by the way, California dropped by 60 cents. They're all the way down to $5.07 a gallon, John. So next time you're in California and you rent a car, maybe don't. It might be better off to be an Uber.
Oh, yeah, it is better off to be an Uber for sure. Well, with the interest rates down and the cost of gasoline down, those are both good things overall for the economy and for Joes and Janes, wherever they may be, Pete. Let's talk a little bit about some stocks maybe now, but we might need to lead into it with a little Deion Sanders telling us what's important.
I'm checking the phone for right now.
What are you checking the phone for?
In your life. That's the only thing you got going that can rescue your family in generations. So lock in.
And we say the same thing to all of you. What are you checking your phone for right now? You should be watching the show.
Ain't that the truth? God, I love
Deion.
You know, it's fun, John, that I can finally be back on the Deion because everybody jumped off. They all jumped on 2 weeks in, and I got so sick of all of it that I was gone. Now I'm back on the bandwagon. And you know what? If he ends up getting a job in the NFL, fantastic. If that's what he wants to do, great. He wants to stay at college, great. If he wants to go to Texas A&M, they got the money.
Wow, do they ever? Man, that was just an embarrassing thing with Jimbo Fisher, Pete. Just an embarrassment, especially for the lack of patience and the fact, Pete, that they fired him after he had the biggest win of the season, I think.
Yeah, that was in the works, though, John. The fact that his
yeah.
production has been bad. He had his first couple years pretty good. After that, not so good. So it says a little bit about something like his Florida State days when he did win a national title, but that was with a former coach's team, and then all of a sudden it went like that. So I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of what his production levels have really been, to be honest. So I understand why they did fire him.
I get it too. Well, let's talk about some REITs, Pete, because I'll be on with Charles Payne later today, and I'm sure I'll get a chance to talk about when interest rates go down like this. What do you think goes up fast, folks? Well, among other things, interest rate sensitive stocks go up really fast. It ain't just the NASDAQ, although Pete is correct that the NASDAQ in general jumps fast when we do have a cut in rates. But SLG, that's SL Green, Pete, Verano, VNO, a bunch of these REITs just screaming higher because of the possibility, I guess, that they're going to be able to refinance some of their debt, not at the hideous rates that we were looking at just a month ago.
Yeah, and those numbers they're meaningful for so many different parts of the market, John, and you and I could point to a lot of different ones. I'll give you one real quick one too, by the way. IYR, that hit yesterday. Well, that was trading right around 77.50 at the time. The options they were buying were going for about, call it 60, 65 cents. Today, that stock was up 6%. It was trading over 82. And all those options, well, the options they bought, they only went from like 65 cents, John, up to about 4.50. Just another day at work. Let me tell you something. That's why we do keep an eye on the unusual option activity. And that was a big buyer, and it was great to see. And it made sense how that whole thing actually fell into place in one day, actually less than a day. Unreal.
Yep, it certainly was. And it's one of those issues, Pete, where you've got the TLT, folks, and that is really a bond ETF. It's actually the 20-year bond, even though many of us look at it and kind of judge the 10-year and the 30-year off of it. But just as Pete said, the IYR, that is one that when it's going up, interest rates are coming down, and it's up big today. Let's talk about C Limited, Pete, SE. We get readings on this one from time to time, and boy, we've had some on it recently. And they seem to be paying off nicely, Pete, because there were some buyers of puts. Yes, put options, folks, in this one. And all they did was miss on virtually everything. And the stock just tanked. And this is a very good day in C Limited, SE, to own puts.
And they were talking, John, on their earnings call, they talked about the competition level really being a huge factor in this, which, in the past, they've been doing pretty well. But in this particular case, they said the competition is there. Their free cash flow, John, it's not a flow, it's a burn, is about $600 million. So there's a lot of things when you look through the company right now, you say, well, this was a little bit of a sign, that was a little bit of a sign, this a little bit of a sign, but that competition I think was the biggest sign of all. And they talked about that. And that's why they swung from these guys generally, John, they've given great earnings. They've done well. In this particular case, they actually lost 26 cents. That's huge. And that's why this stock is getting punished today.
Well, it seemingly deserves it, Pete. And it did have a nice rebound back to the upside, but now giving it all back. All right, let's talk just a little bit maybe about Fisker, Pete. Fisker also had some, put buying, shock of all shocks, that they were buying puts in this one. Fisker is, of course, a beautiful car. It's an EV maker, but it's down today because they had disappointing earnings, a regulatory filing that raised concerns over the company's previous financial statements. That's something nobody wants to hear. And shares were down hard, touching almost $4 a share in just the first few minutes of trade.
Yeah, that stock hit a new 52-week low today, John. It got absolutely hammered. And when you look at it and they talk about the guidance being a lot different than it was and the deliveries being a lot different than they'd hoped it would be, that's a problem. And then you look at the cash burn, that's a problem. You look at the debt levels, that's a problem. And it really does make you wonder, Can these guys survive? Now, we've known this name for a really long period of time, and the EV space has had some struggles of late. And right now, Fisker is definitely somebody who's very challenged. So I would say that if you're looking at it, look at it. I wouldn't say that you want to jump on top of it, John, but if you did, you definitely want to do it with options because you don't want to be hung out to dry. And I think if you do options, at least you know how much you're going to lose. You know that going in. So as long as you understand that world of derivatives, great. If not, don't do that either. But I'd say this is almost an untouched type of stock right now because there's too many headwinds for them to have success.
Yep. Broke through 4, Pete, broke through 370, broke through 350, traded all the way down to 311 today, which is a low that we haven't seen ever for Fisker, but it seems like it might even see some lower numbers than that in the not too distant future. All right, let's finish on a high note, Pete, as far as stocks, solar stocks. So why would solar stocks be up so much? Is energy in big demand right now? Well, it's in demand, but it's not nearly the 90 that it was at a couple weeks ago. It's instead in the 70s. And so what I would say the reason these are doing well, Pete, is these are companies that are growth companies, solar, wind, geothermal, all that. But most of them have been hurt very hard this year because people aren't financing projects at these high rates. So lower rates make them more attractive. And that's why you've got Nova up like 18%, SolarEdge up like 8%, SunPower up 8%, Enphase up 10%. I mean, these solar stocks are just flying today. And again, it's not energy. It's not a bill working its way through Congress. It's lower financing costs.
100% right. I'm agreeing with you, John, on that for sure. And that is a huge wind at their tail. And you got to like that. Tell you what, First Solar, how about that one? One of the biggest bad boys in that whole space. It's a big company, John, up 12%. I mean, that's a pretty nice run as well. So you look at that. You mentioned the financing. It gets a heck of a lot better based upon what the rates are. They also have a lot of declines in the costs that they once had. If you go back, call it a 10-year period, but the last 7 years, it's gotten just a little bit better and a little bit better and a little more cost efficient for these guys as well. So, that combination is giving them a huge boost today. And it's great to see all of these alternative energy stocks really having an unbelievable day today for sure. Yeah.
Well, I'll be talking about that with our buddy Charles, Pete, at 2:15 p.m. Eastern time, folks. Tune into the Fox Business Network for that. All right. Pete, I know you got a bunch of sports, and I suspect that you've got a bunch of NFL on your mind, and you should after that beatdown that the Bills got.
That wasn't a beatdown, but it was a win. And the Bills, how could the Bills do that? How do you get there twice in one game, have too many people on the field? This is the NFL, guys. This isn't, some high school game where you're looking around, hey, where's Jimmy? Jimmy, put your helmet on and get the hell out there. No, this is the NFL. These guys are making millions of dollars, for God's sakes, to be out on the field. And they put too many of them out on the – I mean, when you look at it, John, it's really sad. It's really ridiculous. And I'm not saying that Buffalo even played a great game. They did not. But they had the opportunities, and they screwed it up. And so it is interesting, John, and I think I'd even like to slide into this. And, I touched about this last week, and I'm guarantee you this, ESPN and the rest of these guys in sports will start talking about this because they've been doing it week after week after we've already discussed it. So how about this? Parity in the NFL is at a level like I have never seen it before, John. That doesn't mean that every team is competitive, but you've got a few guys down at the very bottom. And then you've got quite a few, I think, in the upper middle and then getting towards the highs. And what do I mean by that? AFC East, you got Buffalo, Miami. You look at that East and you've got teams that are over 500. Pretty impressive. You've got all 4 teams over 500 in the AFC North. You've got 3 out of 4 over 500 in the AFC South. You look at the AFC West. Other than the Chargers and Broncos, who might win this coming week, you're back to everybody being back at 500. So we are seeing teams that we didn't expect to be better than where they've actually reached to. Throw in Houston as well, John. You and I talked about that one yesterday. But C.J. Stroud having an absolutely incredible year for a first-year player. So with the teams that are struggling are the ones that are surprising to me. And that would be what you just mentioned, Buffalo and Cincinnati. And what do they have in common? They got a couple of quarterbacks that are great that aren't playing very great, despite the fact that they got millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in those contracts. We're talking $250 million a piece, and they just aren't producing. And it's too bad, because I think the world of Josh Allen. I really like him a lot. I think he's a great quarterback, but he's got to stop throwing interceptions, John. He is just a guy that's he's not playing at the level that we probably thought he would be right now. And I'd say the same thing about Joe Burrow. He hasn't been terrible, but he's got 4 interceptions in the last 5 games. You got 11 interceptions this year when you look at Josh Allen. That's too many interceptions for anybody. And we're only 10 games in, John. We're not at week 15 out of 17 or something like that. I mean, it's amazing to me, but I do like the fact that parity is there. Now, not the Bears, sorry, but there are some teams out there, and Minnesota goes out and they pick up Rocket Man, and all of a sudden we're on like a 5 or 6 game winning streak. It's unbelievable how some of these teams are bouncing back and doing well, and including the Raiders. They fire the coach, and now the guy filling in has won 2 games in a row. It just shows you that there's a lot of things going on in the NFL, but what I see is a lot more parity than I've ever seen before.
Well, to Pete's point, folks, Raiders are 5-5 right now. Like he said, they've won 2 in a row. You know what, Pete? They get to play the Little Sisters of the Poor on the upcoming games. Now, one of those Little Sisters of the Poor just beat the Bills, so I guess we got to give Denver a tip of the hat, because they beat Kansas City a week ago, and now they go out and beat the Bills. And everybody, including us, at least including me I thought these guys were crap.
Yep.
And I'm still not convinced, Pete. I think teams have looked past them in their schedules, and then you get out there and, like you say, there is a lot of parity. So these are all, the best player from the school that they came from on these teams. It's not like, one team's just stacked up with a bunch of D3 guys or something like that, even though I was a D3 guy.
There's nothing wrong with that.
5-5, and guess who they play now, Pete? Denver, the Packers, the Patriots, and Mac Jones. We don't even know if he's going to be in the league. The Giants, and boy, did they look pathetic against the Cowboys. And then the Jets. And if Zach Wilson's there, another guy that probably shouldn't be in the league anymore, Pete. I mean, those 2 quarterbacks stink, absolutely stink. And there's a great meme going around of Aaron Rodgers and Zach Wilson that I might have to tweet out after the show. But just pathetic. I mean, They can't switch the ball from their right hand to the left. They fumble. They get half a look downfield, then they start looking for where they're going to get sacked. I mean, it's really bad. Those 2 guys are as bad as it gets. And I think you're right. Parity, it does reign. And the Raiders, Pete, if the Raiders ran through that group that I just described, they'd be 10-5.
Well, and I'll tell you, John, some of the decisions that were made during last year and everything else, and you go out, you go get Jimmy G. Why are you giving Jimmy G all this money? He get way too much money to be the quarterback of the Raiders when he wasn't a very good quarterback with the Niners, but they did it anyway. Now, the one thing, and I got to admit, at least for now, I've been wrong on Russell Wilson. I apologize to you, buddy. But 18 touchdowns and only 4 interceptions, John, that's the difference. He got that offensive line. They've gotten a little bit better every single week. They got the Vikings, I think, this week. So it's going to be interesting because they are playing at a much different level than they started the first, call it 5 or 6 games of the year. They've gotten a little bit of mojo going, and I think they've got a little bit of confidence. And that, obviously, if you beat Kansas City, that gives you some confidence. Then you go out to Buffalo and you beat them. That's going to give you more confidence. So, yeah, there's a lot to this whole thing in the NFL right now. Let's jump back to college football, John.
All right.
Who is the most I'll let you go first on this one if you'd like, but who's the most pro-ready college quarterback? So it doesn't mean anything about the Heisman Trophy, right? The Heisman Trophy, sometimes they get it right. Sometimes, in my opinion, they don't. And the one thing is that it's too bad that it's just always quarterbacks. I mean, they need to expand out a little bit. I mean, especially a guy. I look at Harrison at Ohio State, the receiver. That guy is special, John. He is really big, really athletic. All he does is score touchdowns, but they're so good and have so many different people to throw to that, the ball gets split up a little bit, and he's probably not going to have the numbers that they want for the Heisman. But I think there's a heck of a lot of quarterbacks that are pro-ready. What do you think? Who is there anybody specific you think is the most pro-ready, or what's your top three maybe or something?
Well, that Jones, Pete, and Zach Wilson, this guy could step right in and start, and he could basically do Dobbs. He could step in without knowing any of the plays or players and complete passes and run. And the kid's just a phenom. And you know who it is, Bo Nix. 6'2", about 220. The kid's got a rocket arm. His yards per game is 313, Pete. 29 touchdowns. QB rating, 184. He's thrown for 3,100 yards already this year. So that guy is ready to play and star in the NFL. Now, I'm not putting down your guy from Washington, Pete, but with all those injuries and things, we both know that takes a toll. And teams will be, not saying he's frail because he's played all year this year. He's had bad luck in the past. And NFL doesn't really cater to people that have bad luck with injuries.
Yeah. Well, I totally agree with you. I think Bo Nix is probably the most pro-ready. I'd go with Jaden Daniels next, the kid out of LSU. I mean, he was an Arizona kid, comes out there, goes to LSU, and all he does is throw 30 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, 71% completion. I mean, the kid is lighting it up. Now, their defense is letting him down this year, but he's lighting it up on the offensive side. And you know what? He looks kind of frail when you look at him, but he's got some good height. He's a very athletic guy. And I think physically he is a good-looking guy for the pro football. Everybody else is going to say, number one, without a doubt, Caleb Williams. I'm not in that camp because they're losing games, and they're losing games. I realize the defense is terrible, but they're losing games. And you know what? I think there's something to be said about what they're doing in terms of some of his passing, what he's doing during the games offensively, that's also putting the defense in that much more of a bind. So I don't really like that one. I'll tell you what, how about your guy, Shedeur Sanders, though, John? I mean, when you look at some of the numbers, it's tough to deny. The kid's got 26 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 69%. And by the way, if anybody is keeping track, if we throw in Michael Penix, we've got 4 quarterbacks from the Pac-12, which is where I think is the best college football this year, and only one outside of that. That's Daniels from LSU, who used to be in the Pac-12. So it says a little something about how good those quarterbacks are out there, John. But I think Shedeur Sanders actually looks pretty dang good so far and could be a pretty good pro.
I agree, Pete. And he's doing it with a line that is not helping him very much. He runs for his life a lot back there. And he is not Bo Nix size. He's not 220 pounds. I'm guessing, Pete, that he's more like 190 or something like that. I'm not saying he's frail either, and he's taken a lot of hits. But I think for a conference not known for defense, he needs to get behind a line that gives him a little more protection because this one ain't the one. And hopefully Dion can, put together a better recruiting year, even though he got a lot of kids from the portal. Hopefully he gets a great recruiting year and can really help out that team for the coming years.
And to put a bow on what you just said, John, 48 sacks. The guy's got sacked 48 times. I mean, and that is, John, that's in a league where they don't play defense. Imagine if he were in the SEC. That might be 68 sacks that he had if he was in the or in the Big Ten, where they still play defense, by the way, guys, and it's all in the Big Ten. Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, Iowa, they all play defense, and that's something that the Pac-12, they're going to be in for an interesting introduction to the Big Ten, John, when they get there with those 4 teams, because they don't play defensive teams ever in the Pac-12. That's my biggest criticism of them for sure.
Yep. And you have no better example than Washington versus USC when it's like, whatever it was, Pete, 42 apiece in the first half. It's like there wasn't a lick of defense being played. They were just marching up and down. They were ripping off 10 and 20 yards at a clip, Pete. It was just sad. But then Washington got stout in the second half and shut them down.
Yep.
And that's why they won, because, they scored 10 more points and they left USC in the dust because they actually didn't just let them march up and down the field. By the way, I'll finish up on this one, Pete. University of California plays the Stanford Indians. And the reason I have to use that is, folks, they used to be the Stanford Indians. And then through a whole bunch of terrible things, they've changed their name like 6 times. And now they're just the color cardinal.
They're no longer the tree?
They're the cardinal, Pete.
Oh, God.
I know they still have the tree that runs around on the field and things, but I had a Cal rugby player, Pete, emailed me, and he said, if Cal can beat the Indians this weekend, I think they got a shot at a bowl. And I told him I love that you still call them the Indians because it'll drive them crazy. But that was their name. I have a banner at home that our dad played against Cal. Cal played Stanford every year, and Paul never lost to him either, Pete.
That's not
our
a
brother
bad
Paul. Beat him every time, even with Elway at the helm. So
I was going to say, even with John Elway, who became, the second coming of something, at least for a while in the NFL, that's for sure. So, yeah, that's cool.
Well, thanks for joining us, folks. It's only Tuesday.
Fantastic.
So the market's been moving all over the place.
It's almost
you
like
watch
that
3 at
background
3,
on my screen,
which comes
Pete.
your way
There's
3
probably
o'clock
about 50
Eastern time
people in
today.
here.
And Pete and I will be back with the Rebels Edge tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern time. Bang.